All right, first resume review that we're gonna get to. So the only thing that I asked is that you anonymize your email address and your phone number on these resumes. So this is the first one that we're gonna take a look at. So let me go get the context of what they sent in with the submission. By the way, if you want to get in on the submission, I'll put this in chat for you again. You can send your resume over to this link, techinterview.guide/resume review. And if you want to see a sample of resumes, I do have a resume sample, that you can do. And there's a Google Doc here that you can go check out. It's open access. You can just go grab whatever bits out of that you'd like. But it's kind of a sample resume. I believe it's this Google Doc. Yep. And so these are just, this isn't a full resume, of course, but it'll give you an idea of like, here's how you could do your contact information. Here's how you could do your skills block. Here's how you can talk about experience. Here's how you could build projects. Now, it doesn't have to be in this order. I'll be going through that as part of the resume review, but it'll give you an idea of like kind of a straightforward way that you can sort of present this stuff. So let's dive in on this first resume review. This one came in from Bob Bobbins. It's a great name. This is a fake LinkedIn. That's fantastic. This is also a fake email. This is a fake email at duck.com. All right, cool. So let's take a look at this one, and I'll read off kind of the note. I'll summarize this a little bit. It said, I was recommended to do this by a fellow classmate from my boot camp. After graduating, I interned for about 4 months. Soon after, landed a contract role, and I've been there for the better part of 9 months. The current company I'm working out at was very transparent with me recently, told me that given our size, they would not be able to afford my services past February of 2023. With that, I'm back on the job hunt. I'd like to know what you would keep or get rid of on the resume or add to the current resume. All feedback is appreciated. I listen to your podcast, appreciate all that you're doing. Cheers. Awesome. Well, I appreciate that you're listening to the podcast. I've also got an audio version of the questions and stuff that I snip out. You can go find all that on the website. Or I think you can do !podcast and it'll give you just the audio-based podcast. If you want to go listen to the Q&A stuff, you can go subscribe to that, and you can listen to all the old episodes where I talk about behavioral questions and just general Q&A and stuff. All right, so let's get in on the resume. First thing I like to do on here is I like to zoom out and kind of get a sense of how are you using the space on the page. The first thing that stands out is your skills block is way down here at the bottom, and you're doing kind of this multi-column thing where each term is centered within each of their columns. The whole layout of this, honestly, to me looks a little messy because you've got things that are kind of all over the page, and it's kind of drawing my eye kind of in a zigzag motion. If we kind of see what's happening here. So our eyes as readers are drawn to empty space on a page. And so I'm looking at all of this, and you're kind of drawing my eye down this empty path here where all of this empty space is in between these phrases. So like I'm going to try and read some of this, but it's actually drawing my eye out into this empty area and then back around here. And so I'm actually going to be missing a lot of content on the page because you're basically drawing my eye in an arc across the page this way. Now, as a hiring manager, the first thing I need to see on a resume is how are you relevant to the job post for which you've applied for a job? In my case, as a hiring manager, the first thing I want to know is, do you have the skills that I'm looking for? Well, I got to look through the entire page here to get down to your skills block. And I will zoom in on this in a moment. But when I look at this, like really zoomed out, I like to kind of see, like, are you using the space in a good way? Now, most hiring managers won't, but subconsciously, they're going to look at this and go, this looks weird. And they're more likely to pass on it unless it's like, oh, I can easily find what I'm looking for on the page. So that's the first thing I would mention here. All right, so zooming in, let's take a look at it. So in this case, this person's got some experience. They're at a contract role. They know they're going to be there until February, but they're going to be cut off in February. So they're doing a remote job, doing another remote job with company names and so on. So this person did a really good job anonymizing things. What I would probably start with is changing all these months to just a 3-letter month and just do like JAN and do AUG for August and NOV for November. Just that way, all of the dates are going to be approximately the same width. Now, the present is going to be a little bit wider, maybe, but that way, all of the dates are going to look kind of the same width instead of like you've got remote January 2020, and then it gets wider for the August 2021, and then it gets really skinny because on this job, you only give me the years. And we'll talk about that. And then you go back to months and years, and then you go back to just years, but this date isn't pushed up against that right margin. So again, your formatting is inconsistent here. So as much as possible, you want your resume to be easy to read, but you need to make it really easy for me to find the information I'm looking for the job that I'm posting. So the first thing I would say is get this skills block up to the very top. You want that to be the first thing that somebody reading the resume reads. In newspaper terms, if anybody sees like a physical newspaper, there's a term that we call above the fold. And how above the fold works, I'm just going to use my notebook here as an example. If this is the newspaper, when they fold it and they present it, you only see half of that newspaper. You don't see what's on the bottom half of that page. But if you were to unfold the whole thing, like this would be the whole front page. But when it's folded up like this, what's on that front page is like the most eye-grabbing, attention-grabbing headline, and like the first part of the photo they want you to see, and like all the really important like headline bits along the top that they really want you to know, like this is the most important reason. This is why you need to pick up this newspaper and buy this newspaper. What's on the bottom half is also important, but not as important as what we call what happens above the fold. Well, on the resume, it's the same thing, except on a resume, above the fold is basically the first screen of text that I see before I have to scroll down on the page. We use the same terminology when we build web pages. Anything above that first page, like when they land on that page, anything they see before they have to start scrolling down is what we call above the fold. And that's the best place to put things to really grab someone's attention. So I like to see skills right at the very top because I want to see in a hurry, are you relevant to this job? So that would be my first piece of advice. And we'll get into how to format that later on. But I would love to see the skills block first. Otherwise, we're jumping in here. You're a software engineer at a company. You've developed new features, tested coverage to ensure no breaking changes were introduced. Okay. This part here is a little bit redundant because as a software engineer, I really hope that you're not introducing breaking changes into my software. So this is almost not worth saying because it kind of reflects a bit of a negativity on the page where you're like, oh yeah, I don't want anybody doing that. At the same time, you do want people to read the resume and go, I want this person to come to my company and do that. But when it comes to like, I make sure that nothing breaks in the software that I write. It's like, well, that's an expectation of the job. So you don't really need to draw attention to that. Saying that you develop new features and you test, you've got good test coverage, that's good. I would probably quantify that a little bit. How many new features have you made? How much test coverage have you added? What was the impact of that? So tell me the impact of doing the thing. Telling me that you did the thing, that's great. Telling me the impact of doing that thing. Like I added these new features and we had 50% more signups. Or I added some test coverage and fixed 25% of the bugs in our system and sped things up by 20%. You can get those percentages from people on the team. Like if you're new in the industry, people on your team can help you find those kinds of statistics. You want to use a tool called a profiler, where you can basically say, okay, before I made the change, this is how fast it ran. Now that I made that change, this is how fast it runs now. And you can kind of get a relative timing and say, okay, well, it used to take 1.2 seconds and now it takes 0.4 seconds. So I reduced the time by 66%. So those are really good statistics to put on a resume as a developer. If you can't get those, that's fine. You can still use what we've got on here as far as like telling me what you did. But if you can tell me the impact of what you did, like how did that change the company? How did that make things better for the company? That's where you're kind of pulling on the psychology of the reader where they think, oh, I need Bob Bobbins to come to my company and do that. Like, I really want to talk to them about doing that here. Or, wow, I want to get them on the phone and talk to them about how they did that. Like, how did they speed that thing up by 100x? Like, is that legit? Like, I need to get them on the phone and find out how they refactored that to speed it up so much. So you want to like really play on that emotion a little bit. The other thing that I noticed as I'm kind of looking through this is there's not a lot of empty space between these jobs. All of these jobs are like really crammed together. As much as possible, you want to try to have like a little bit more blank space between these two lines. Just that way, like each job kind of stands out or is a little bit separated from each other. Because right now the line spacing on all of this feels like it's all the same kind of thing. And you are using a slightly larger size font here. but not significantly so that it really stands out. Of, you know, it makes it a little bit easier if you kind of chunk things up. If you like open a book and you see like you've got a paragraph and then a blank line and then a paragraph and then a blank line, it helps our brain sort of like break things up into these sort of bundles or packages of information. Debugged open issues, wrote fixes, and created GitHub pull requests. Okay, so you already told me some of that by doing this. Like you develop new features, and so you're debugging open things, you're writing fixes, and so on. They're kind of the same. I mean, it's all part of being a software engineer. But I think you could probably combine both of these together in a single bullet point where you said develop new features, fixed bugs, added test coverage using GitHub flow, like workflow. And I think you could probably get that all in one line. So that'll save you a little bit of space on here. Manually reviewed all application functionality for every new release. Well, then why did you write tests if you were manually reviewing everything? To me as a hiring manager, I'm like, okay, but you wrote tests and yet you're manually testing everything. So on one case, it's like, okay, good, you're doing user testing and making sure that it works, but that also tells me that you're probably spending a significant amount of time actually going through and manually checking all these things, when that's why we write automated tests, so that we don't have to do that manually. So calling out that you manually reviewed all of this, to me actually stands out as a negative. And I probably wouldn't phrase it this way. You could say like utilized some user testing, you know, for functionality for every new release. Now, granted, you're doing this on a mobile device or potentially on mobile devices, but you can do automated testing where it's pulling up emulators for Android and iOS and figuring out how to do that automated testing against a mobile device. Again, you're going to make the company better because you're not manually there on your phone downloading the app and testing out those features. You can automate that stuff. So if you can figure out how to automate that between now and February, that would look much, much better on a resume. In the meantime, just saying that you're manually double checking things, I think would be good. I think maybe just rephrase it a little bit. Like instead of manually reviewing all application functionality, I might phrase it like double checked functionality after release on Android and iOS or something like that. Just that lets me know that you're doing a little bit of user testing, but the way that you've worded it here, you know, I reviewed all application functionality. That basically means every time we pushed a release, I spent like a bunch of time going through every single feature of an app and every little nook and cranny of the application on both Android and on iOS. That's a significant amount of time. And for me, that would be worrisome for an engineer. I would expect a QA person to do that, maybe not my engineer, because engineers are generally going to cost a little bit more than QA people. So as much as possible, I would probably rephrase this a little bit. Tony Boy asks, how can I submit my resume? Here's the link for it. So feel free to get a resume in. And then any new resumes that come in, I'll definitely add on the queue. We've got 5 to go through. Usually the first couple I take a little bit longer, and then the rest of them go a little bit faster, because I'll be like, yeah, remember that other one? And so I'll go through the other ones a little bit faster. So the first one tends to go a little bit longer. Follow the atomic design methodology to build an isolated component storybook library with TypeScript. Okay. Onboard and mentor incoming engineers on Ionic, GraphQL, and other technologies and languages used. Okay. Run end-to-end server tests using Mocha and Chai to ensure all features are working as expected. Okay. So this is basically just, I ran automated testing on here, which is fine. Again, you want to make it sound like it's not this huge manual effort. Like that's why we write automated testing. So building it out in a way, okay, stop broadcasting in the house, I'm streaming. Sorry, my kids are broadcasting to one another on Google Home and it's showing up on my my desk. I should have muted my mic. Apologies, everybody. So yeah, you want to make it sound like this isn't such a big manual effort. That, you know, we wrote automated testing. Maybe you're doing it in a CI/CD pipeline or something where it's doing the automated runs for you, that you're not sitting there like manually running the tests. You want that to be as automated as possible, or at least showcase that you know how to do that in an automated way. Conducted fact-finding investigations, claims employers to audit tax violations, exemptions. Okay, so with this one, this is non-technical experience. So what I would probably do is reduce this down to a single bullet point, because this is not technical experience. The other thing that I kind of alluded to earlier is you change the format here from going from months and years to just the years. But all I know is you started this job in August, and this one was 2021. So was this job from January 2020 all the way to August 21? Was there overlap between these jobs? Was this literally January of 2020 through December of 2021? Did you start this in December of 2020 and ended in January of 2021 because that was only a 2-month job? Like, put some months on here. Otherwise, it like, to me, it kind of feels like you're hiding how long were you really at that job, because it could be a maximum of 2 years. It could be a minimum of 2 months. By only putting the months on there, I don't have good visibility into how long you actually did this. Now, because it's a non-technical job, you also want to reduce what you did there. I would probably keep the thing where you have quantified information. So as much as possible, I would probably keep the quantified info, or like any bullet point where you've got quantified info. But yeah, I would probably find a way to combine all of this into a single bullet point. Because it's non-technical work, you've got 3 bullet points for each of these jobs, 2 bullet points for this job. So you're giving almost the same equivalence of importance to this non-technical job, unless you're transitioning into a tech job where you're going to be doing something with, around like tax violations and exemptions. Like if you're going to go apply for a job at a payroll company or something like that, this would be a good thing to keep on here. Otherwise, I would probably reduce the amount of information that you're telling me about that job, because it won't be important to non-financial industries. It's good to see that you were employed. They'll want to know how long you were employed. So it's important to show that you were employed, but I would probably reduce the amount of information here, unless it's a job that's more specific to the information that you're giving me here. Education with the boot camp, 27-week boot camp, 800 hours. Okay. 70 plus projects. That's a lot. 27 weeks and you built 70 projects in 27 weeks? That's a lot. Like, as a hiring manager, I would look at that and go, that's a lot. That's what, like 3 projects a week? Like, how big are these projects? Like, in my mind, I'm starting to work through this going, you built a project like every day or every 2 days at this boot camp for 27 weeks total. That's a lot of projects, which means the projects are either microscopic, or like they were building on each other, or they're not going to be that impressive if you're only spending a day or 2 building out a project. So I would question that 70 plus. If I can go look at your GitHub and I actually see all of those projects, then it would give me some reassurance on here. But just at face value, what I would probably do is, instead of saying I built 70 projects in a variety of languages, I only care about the languages that my company actually uses. So if you built this out in a whole bunch of languages that my company doesn't even use, that's not an immediate benefit to my company. And so you probably want to say, like, if I was hiring for a Python role, you'd probably want to say I built 10 projects in Python over that 27 weeks. That's, to me, that would be more believable. Even if it is part of 70, you're telling me, hey, you do Python, I also do Python. I did 10 Python projects at this bootcamp. Now, when I go look at your GitHub, I'm going to see all of the projects and I'll see all of the stuff and go, wow, you actually built a lot more than that. But to see 70 plus in over 27 weeks, to me, sounds fishy, and starts bordering on unbelievable. It may be perfectly believable and may actually be part of the curriculum, but I think how it's phrased here is a little misleading. Now, if you graduated in August 2021 and you've continued to build projects after that, then that's different. So couple things, couple points in there as well. LOS Inc., thanks for the first time chat. Good to see you. Utilize remote collaboration tools such as VS Code, LiveShare, Slack, Google Meet, Discord. These are all great to see. Like, this is how I collaborate, worked on group projects and things like that. I think that that's fantastic. What I would probably do on these projects, though, is specifically call out this was a group project or this was a solo project. So if we kind of come back over to the sample resume over here, this is how I like to actually highlight. This one was a solo project. This one was a group project. And on a group project, my responsibility was this portion of the project. So that would be an important thing to call out if you've got solo projects and group projects, because you're telling me here that you've worked on group things. If you're applying for a remote job, having collaboration tools would be fantastic. So I would want to see both a solo project and a group project on your resume. Ideally, I would see 3 projects on a resume, if you can kind of spare the space on here. As far as the skills go, we already talked, like, try to put that skills block up at the top of the resume. I think that it's more visible and kind of gets the point across. I'm also not a fan of this multi-column, centered term within the column kind of layout. I think it's wasted space. You've got a lot of interesting technologies on here that you've done. But when I read it, if I read it left to right, top to bottom, I get library, like what is async storage? It's kind of, okay, you know how to store things. Mapbox, I don't even know what that is. I know what Ionic is, the mobile framework. Storybook, no idea. JSTS, I would literally spell those out as JavaScript, TypeScript. You want to hit on those keywords. Because if you don't have the word JavaScript on here, anywhere on the page, if I'm literally searching my database for JavaScript, you're not going to get hit. Your resume doesn't hit on the keyword JavaScript or TypeScript. So you have to be careful about shortening the name like this. So I would literally expand that out, call it JavaScript, TypeScript, GraphQL. So now we're getting into language, we're getting into kind of a database query. Then you're getting into more like front-end frameworks. Not sure what Zustend is. Firebase, Firestore, it's online storage. VS Code is a tool. Nobody cares what tool you use, so you can take VS Code off of here. All I care about is, can you write code? I don't care what tool you use to write the code. GitHub is a capital H. Debugging, is that really a skill? I mean, it's kind of one of those expected skills. Like, I expect that if you write code, you know how to debug it. So you don't really have to call this out as a specific skill. Now, if you've done something like advanced around debugging, like using profiling tools and things like that, where you're getting into like, finding bottlenecks as part of your debugging, then I would call that out. But just saying debugging is a skill, it's kind of an expectation. It would be like saying, I know how to use email. Like, I hope you know how to use email. I hope you know how to do debugging. Not really something that you need to specifically call out here. TDD using Jest is fine, but you also mentioned Mocha and Chai. So you want to make sure that any of the technologies that you're listing up in your projects and up in here, other things that you use, that you're listing those here in your skills block as well. But kind of the point I was getting at is this is kind of all over the place as far as frameworks and languages and libraries and like just methodologies. I would probably group them up in a more logical fashion. So again, one of the things that I do on that resume sample in the skills block is I say, these are the languages I know. Now, if you want to put your frameworks in there as well, that's okay. But then call out your libraries, call out databases that you've used. In your case, Firebase, but then you also had GraphQL. I don't recall that you can do GraphQL in front of Firebase. So that tells me that maybe someone on a back end has put GraphQL in front of a relational database, but you don't mention any relational databases on there. So you know how to interact with GraphQL. Like that's what I'm getting off of your resume, is that you know how to interact with GraphQL using something like Apollo, but you don't know how to actually implement GraphQL where you're actually building the query and telling it which tables to go read from and so on, because you don't mention any other relational database on here, like Postgres or MySQL or something like that. So that would be something to think about here. But try to group them up a little more logically as far as like, these are the languages I know. Get HTML, get CSS on here. If you've done front-end work, you know HTML and CSS, you need to call those out. And then put libraries and put, other tools and things like that, like GitHub and Git workflow and things like that. You could even call out a whole section of testing. Just say testing, test-driven development, Jest, Mocha, Chai, user testing on Android and iOS. Like, you can specifically call those out as skills. So that'll give your skills block a little more, it'll make it a little beefier, to be honest. It'll kind of expand that skills block out a little bit and give people reading your resume a little more to sort of catch on to. Old River says in chat, I use links on my resumes for the projects I like best. Yep. I do recommend putting links on there. And so typically what I recommend is, if you can tell me that it was a solo project or a group project, give me a link where you actually host the project somewhere, if possible. For the mobile apps on that other resume, if you've got them in a Google Play Store or the Apple Store, give me links to those where I can actually like go download it and experience it. Or, you know, give me a link to GitHub where I can actually go look at the code. That would be fantastic. This particular, like I had someone come by and say, well, you know, we made a video about how we made the project. Can I put that on a resume? I'm like, sure, you can put a YouTube link or something on here. It tells me like about how you built a project if you want to, if you feel that that's going to be important for me to see. Again, you don't want to clutter the resume with stuff that I'm not going to care about. So some of it is trying to discern what is that company going to care about. So that's a big part of doing a resume is like, what are they going to care about? What aren't they going to care about? How do I take that other stuff off that they don't care to see? All right, so that's the first resume. So hopefully that'll give everybody kind of like the start of a baseline. The rest of the resume reviews are going to go a little bit quicker from here.